copper met those criteria in pore water, predicting no toxicity. As indicated, copper did exceed the water quality criteria, but that exceeded it for all samples, including upstream reference samples, indicating it was more of a regional issue than a site-specific issue. The third point was that toxicity indicators, namely the toxicity tests that were done at the laboratory, they yielded very similar results, indicating that there was no toxicity from site samples on the invertebrates in the laboratory. Fourthly, the pathway contamination, or the results from the clams that were collected, indicated that the tissue samples that were collected near site were very similar to the background samples, and there was no elevated level of bioaccumulation. And then lastly, the community survey that was conducted, in which we actually went out there and counted the bugs that lived in the sediment, indicated that the communities residing in this area of the river were highly variable, and that they were very similar to background, both near site and upstream. So what does this all mean in regards to question number one? Again, question number one being, are metals and near-site sediments impacting the benthic organisms? The multiple lines of evidence indicate that the levels of metals were not bioavailable or toxic to the organisms, and that the benthic communities were not impaired. There was a second question that was answered as part of the sediment investigation, and that deals with what the sediment, the important differences of the metals concentrations with depth. And the question was evaluated by looking at the 10-foot sediment cores that were collected. The different information that was collected to look at that was a geochronology, or looking at the radioisotopes within the sediment to try and tie that back to, it's a method that we use to actually age sediment, because we can tie it back to when the atomic testing was done, and it allows us to actually provide a dating of the sediment. We looked at vertical concentration profiles, where over the depth of the core we would look at the various metal concentrations, and we could see if there was any patterns that would reflect historic deposition. And we also looked at the general changes beneath the sediment surface, and we compared those